What's up, guys? Welcome back to Morningwood Academy. Bro, how deep did you go into the self-love and the mirror work, man? That's one of my favorite sessions of this whole entire course, is that stretch of time, because I know what it did for me in my life when I went through that challenge for the first time. And in case I haven't told you yet, when I started that challenge was December 1st and 2020, okay? And then by the time I finished, or actually no, within 17 days, I had sold my car, I had quit my job, and I had a ticket to Bali, right? To Bali, where I live now. And ultimately, it was the catalyst for so much change when I started loving myself the way that I do now, right? And it's only gotten better from there. And so I hope you went deep, and I hope you got the value out of it. To just know the things that happen, the shifts that happen, are on the subconscious level. So even if nothing miraculously changed for you right now, just remember that things did change on the inside, and how you start to show up in your life from now on can be completely different. All right. So in some past modules, you guys, we learned about replacement behaviors and how important they are to help us retrain our bodies and our brains to stay away from porn and other things that have, high triggers, high levels of things that trigger high levels of dopamine. All right. Fantasy in any form that you choose it. If it's not the most damaging, it's at least one of the most damaging things that I can think of, in terms of damaging your sensitivity and keeping you from getting your life back. It's so addictive. And so the best way to steer clear of those hooks that draw you in is to take action on your replacement behaviors, right? Get out of this space and follow it up with whatever you came up with on your list, all right? Now, there's a lot of value in terms of thinking about things in proactive versus reactive thinking. Like, you can do things to maybe use up all your energy so you don't jerk off, like maybe going to the gym or something like that. And I don't really subscribe to that, because in reality, when you get triggered to watch porn, those chemicals are so strong and frankly motivating that when your tiredness, it's just going to take a back seat, because the chemicals that you're given now from your brain, they give you exactly what you need to finish the job. Okay? That's what the chemicals are there for. And so we're going to actually get into more of that here soon. But to summarize, by doing the replacement behaviors and then journaling out your findings when you test, okay, you're going to begin to identify these patterns. And over time, you can start to eliminate your unhelpful habits and replace them with helpful habits. All right. So let's dive into today's lesson. Okay. It's important to realize that all this talk about habit change is super important, right? Super important. Now, you got to also realize that we're playing with chemicals in our brain. All right. So how many times have we heard the story about the mother who's addicted to crack, and the judge says to her, if you use crack one more time, we're going to take away your baby. And what does she do? She goes and uses crack, even though now she's going to go lose her baby. Why would she do that? Well, because porn and other types of fantasy, they're using the exact same chemicals that reward addicts for their actions. Okay? Even if you want to quit watching porn or chatting with singles when you're a married man or using video games, right? Somewhere deep in our brains, we're using that stimulation to fill a very old program. Okay? I told you that I used to use porn as a tool, to help me last longer during sex. And although I thought it was serving me on that level, it was actually serving me on a completely different and much deeper level. Okay? Somewhere in my brain, I believed somewhere that I was actually mating with those women every time that I jerked off. I was meeting my biological need to reproduce. I know it sounds crazy, but when things are that deep, rationality goes out the window and survival mode turns on. Okay, that's why changing our behavior is so important. But it's so hard, man. And I'm sure you already know. One of the reasons why it's so hard is because when our lives are literally surrounded with fantasy, right? I mean, the cards are stacked against us from the get-go. But as you become more aware of society, you're going to see little bits and pieces of sexy women everywhere. And I'm not saying that that's bad in general, but the places you're going to see them are going to surprise you. Okay, I know you've heard the term sex sells, and it's obvious that you're going to see a beautiful model holding a cheeseburger in the future. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. All right, this is the tip of the iceberg. And if you scroll upon a woman in a bikini and it triggers you to go watch porn, then that's what we're taking action for in our replacement behaviors. Okay? And I'm sure right now you're watching this from your safe place in your home, and you've already written them out and you've printed them and you have them posted up so you can be reminded to what to do when you get triggered, right? Excellent work, brother. Just remember, this is not going to be an easy thing in the beginning. Okay? Right now, it's not a habit that you've ingrained yet. Okay? So I want to talk about identifying your struggles. Okay? The first few times, you're going to think that it's stupid or hard or a waste of time. You know, it could be raining outside and you don't want to go outside. I get it. Okay? There could be people in your house that you don't want to have to see you leave the house again. It's like, hey guys, just going on another walk. Don't mind me. You know, but listen to your reasons. I also call these excuses, but whatever they are, for right now in your life, they're valid. You can feel the emotional charge, and that makes them real to you. Okay? These are your current programs running. These are your current habits. So we're going to go to war against the same chemicals that keep us safe from those prehistoric predators. All right? The same chemicals that want you to chase down the highest calorie food to ensure your survival. The same chemicals that want us to reproduce and spread our seed with as many women as possible so that our lineage will continue. These are the chemicals. These are some Grand Canyon-sized pathways, right? These neural pathways. They've been programmed into us since prehistoric man. And the reason why we're having these issues now is because we have an unlimited supply of dopamine through porn or fantasy and any method at our fingertips. Okay? I want to talk to you about something called the Coolidge effect. And there's a process that mammals have, and this has been proven in a bunch of different ways, but the gist of this was a study that was done on rats. And they took two healthy rats, a male and a female, and put them into the same room, like a box. And predictably, they had sex again and again and again until the man was unable to perform. Okay, there's a level of refractory period when you just can't go anymore. I'm sure you've been there before. Okay, so in other words, he couldn't be stimulated anymore. All right? Then what they do? They took out the female rat and they put a new female in. And guess what happened? Exactly. The male sprung back into action, and new stimulation created new chemicals in his brain and allowed him to start having sex again and again and again until he couldn't go any longer, until he couldn't be stimulated anymore, until they changed out the female again and then put a new one in, new stimulation, and he stepped back up to the plate over and over and over, and he was fertilizing her until he couldn't be stimulated anymore by her. Now, one of the main things that they were tracking over the study was the male rat's dopamine levels. Okay, at first, with his first partner, his levels were through the roof, and each time he had an orgasm, the levels dropped and then dropped further until there was nothing left for him there to perform at all. You know, we've been there before. But as soon as a new female was introduced, the levels shot up again, new stimulation, and he was able to go for more rounds until his dopamine levels depleted again. And with each new female partner, the same thing happened. New partner, new stimulation. New partner, new stimulation. Okay? This could have gone on until the male rat died if the researchers wanted to, but you know, the male rat was just running off his programming. Okay? The idea that novelty, newness, creates these dopamine spikes began to pique the scientists' interest, and they began studying it harder ever since. Okay? This is important because if you take our ancient ancestors, right, the number of females that they saw on a regular basis was much lower than it is now. I mean, they had smaller villages and they just didn't have the access to a lot of women like we do today. And then the number of women that they actually got to have sex with in order to have children was even smaller. And all the way up through history, man has had his biological needs of companionship and intimacy met with the love and presence of a woman. And I won't get into any bisexual talk, but sometimes that relationship, they didn't work. But they both found happiness with new stimulation from other people. But now today, you have these magical machines in the form of cell phones and laptops and tablets and anything where you can pull up any kind of stimulation you want, from porn to video games to social media. You have anything you want and it's unlimited. Okay. Now I know in the past, I've been guilty of lying in my bed at night, not being able to sleep and simply roll over and grab my phone. And, I always told myself that I wasn't going to jerk off this time. I was only going to watch. I just want to watch, no touching. Well, a minute or two into it and my underwear were off and my late night session was underway, right? And so the chemicals that led me to make that decision were the same that a drug addict faces when they're searching for their next fix. Okay, so even when we want to make a change in our behavior, we're fighting our deeply rooted programs, okay? Even when that mom that smokes crack loses her child, she just made a poor decision. I tell you about these chemicals this way, first of all, because it's true. And secondly, because if you can learn to address the chemicals in a different way, and you can start to rewire them back, not just to normal, but rewire them so that your life is unrecognizable than it is now, you're going to take completely new and different actions. And therefore, you're going to get completely new and different results in your life. Okay. Now, obviously, the best place to start is this root focus, right? And here we are a couple weeks, a month in. It might not be ingrained as a habit yet, but it will be in time. And that's only one habit though. Okay. We can't do it for 24 hours per day, but our habits are what run our lives. 95% of our daily behaviors are the same ones we did yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. Okay. We must use conscious effort to change our habits. We got to stack these positive habits in our favor. Okay. And we have to remove any triggers from our environment. Okay. An example could be, if you're an alcoholic, don't hang out at bars. Okay. But for guys like us, if fantasy is leading you in a direction that you'd rather not go, unsubscribe to the pages, the friends, the posts, the channels that trigger you. Okay. And this can include seemingly harmless TV shows and movies. I mean, seriously, what's more important to you? Fixing your relationship, reversing your ED, or looking at a pair of tits on a screen, chatting with a woman when you're married, playing an imaginary video game, winning imaginary points? We know what the answer is, but again, we're playing the chemical game. Okay? The rules aren't fair. The game is rigged. And you know what? You're the only one who can grab onto the life preserver by changing these areas of your life. I remember the sad, but ultimately glorious time when I threw away my entire porn DVD collection. All right. I must have had about 20 to 30 full-length DVDs. And I also had dozens of scenes right on my computer from the days of downloading from the internet. Whatever your favorite downloading service was. I liked LimeWire. But it's funny, LimeWire always gave me this funny pop-up that said, this file could contain a virus. This file could harm you. And the way I always read that was like, well, it also could not contain a virus. So you're saying there's a chance. That was good enough for me back then. I didn't even care. I just wanted to see the MILF hunter, get one more hot mom. He always banged the girls that were just my style. Now notice, how do you feel in your body as I talk about this? This is awareness. Okay. What you do right now is the most crucial moment. Hopefully I didn't say enough to full out trigger you, but just realize how subtle it is. And the smallest things can potentially send us towards that direction. But back to my point, by the time actual internet porn became mainstream, I was already in deep, and I didn't want to throw away my porn collection. They were what I felt got me through some of the toughest times during my marriage. And then afterwards, they had comforted me when I was struggling. But through that energetic feeling, I began to understand what a deep hold porn had on me. I struggled with this for about a year. Okay. And it just sat there in one of my dresser drawers until one day I was well into my recovery. I was over 2 months clean from porn and semen retention, and I was on a good, positive upswing in my life. And I decided to clean my room and just toss out some old clothes. And then I saw them sitting there in that box in my dresser. And it was like this crazy sci-fi Twilight. Do, 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 do. And I just knew that I should not put one into my disk drive, right? My DVD player. I just knew I shouldn't. But I failed to perform my replacement behaviors. I set them up already and I failed. My curiosity really got the better of me, and I plugged one in and I watched one of my favorite scenes, all right? Reminiscing of the good old days when those DVDs were all I had, and if you remember from my story, at one point my addiction, it was so bad that I couldn't even get hard to porn. I was so far gone. But since I had been doing the root focus consistently and I had been working on my sensitivity, my erections, they came back stronger than ever when I watched porn. And it was like a lost dog finding its master. My brain rejoiced that it was finally getting attention to those old neural pathways that were almost overgrown. But when I watched that porn, man, when I tested, I sent a brand new asphalt paver down, and those pathways, I cleared them up real nice and made them nice and fresh again. And I relapsed a few days in a row, right? My dopamine levels were spiking and lowering, spiking and lowering, spiking and lowering. That's called the rebound effect. And we're going to talk about that in a future module. But when I finally came to my senses, when all of my dopamine had been expressed into my gym socks, my 2-month porn streak was over. It was 77 days, actually. My semen retention was totally shattered. And it was like multiple times per day during those days, and I was hating myself for slipping. All right. I was on a roll, right? I couldn't believe that I had been so weak, but I didn't understand then that I was up against more than just habit change. Okay. I was up against the chemicals in my biology, something way stronger than I could ever hope to overcome just out of my own sheer willpower. Okay. I learned a few lessons there. First, the chemicals will win every time that you let them sink in deep enough. Okay. That's why it's so freaking important to act on your replacement behaviors. Okay. It could have saved me a lot of grief and sorrow of beating myself up. And second, now that we know that we're playing an unfair game with chemicals, it's even more important to not beat yourself up when you test. Okay? You will test. It's how the game was rigged. We test, we learn, we grow. All right? We don't beat ourselves up for not being stronger than the chemicals that have allowed us to evolve. All right? That's not going to get you anywhere. And third, you absolutely must control your environment where you can. Okay? I went right back to my box of DVDs and I threw them outside in the garbage, and I never looked back. Okay? It's funny how I felt so empowered afterwards. Like I just took a major step in the right direction. By getting those things out of the house, I can never watch them again. By throwing them away, I know that no one else will ever be hurt by them either. Okay, the negative pull that they had on me was finished. Okay, so setting up my environment for success by throwing those away was one of my major turning points. And I was really committing to myself that I was done watching porn. And it was like I was finally drawing the line in the sand, and I said, hey, this is enough. I had it with porn and what it was doing to my life. This was a huge barrier for me, honestly, and this was a huge win for me in my battle against porn. So bro, if you're holding on to your old DVDs or downloaded porn, I seriously want to urge you to destroy it. Throw it away, delete it, whatever you got to do. And hopefully the act of being in its proximity, it's not enough to trigger you like it was for me. Or at least if it is, you have my story to compare it to, and that you're totally normal. Okay? But eventually, as soon as possible, you want to get rid of all of it. And bro, if your major stimulant isn't porn, but video games, then this might be a time to pack up a few boxes and leave them at your friend's house or your family's house. You know, you make the call. Okay. This is your life. But brother, this was a heavy session today. You know, I want you to sit back, do some root focus, chill out, try not to get triggered. But if you do, you know you got your replacement behaviors. Much love.